Teithio dros ei llwybrau a thaim o'i hyd. Tir oedd ein dewinoedd ar gan yn un ar gwynt yr
Welcome to the September episode of our podcast. I'm Dani, the Dark Skies officer, so of course our topic this month is dark skies. I'm here to convince you that our dark skies should be a national treasure. Snowdonia has been a dark sky reserve since 2015 and is the largest in Wales. One of only 18 globally, it's a sanctuary for stargazers, for those of us who want to look up and out into the universe and see hundreds of thousands of stars looking back. Light pollution is wasted light, a growing issue globally, with 98% of Europeans living under light polluted skies, with huge economic, health and biodiversity implications. We're working in Snowdonia to reduce light pollution, to protect the night, to benefit the health and well-being of our residents and visitors in the park, to conserve and enhance nocturnal habitats, and to celebrate our view of the stars and the culture they have inspired for thousands of years. Wales has the highest percentage of protected dark skies of anywhere in the world, but Wales is not alone in its quest for darkness. I've got Georgia MacMillan here from County Mayo in Ireland, and she's going to tell us all about what's happening in Ireland. Welcome to the podcast, Georgia. It's so nice to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dani.
I believe you're about to embark on a dark skies PhD, so tell me your story. Tell me a bit about your role and what's led you down this road to this PhD.
Yeah, it's a long road, and I'm very lucky, first of all, to get it. It's a scholarship through the Irish Research Council, so I've been putting in applications for researching dark skies and rural tourism, and together with the institution I'm working through is the National University of Ireland in Galway, and it's an employment-based PhD, so it means I can conduct my role as Mayo Dark Sky Development Officer, and whilst I'm doing that research, for the PhD, so it'll be a 4-year program.
That sounds really exciting. I will definitely be following your work. I can't wait to see what you do.
I think I need to pick your brains on it as we, so that's all. It's quite a holistic project. So,
yeah, it sounds great. So Mayo has its own dark sky status, doesn't it? So do you want to tell us a bit more about the status in Mayo and what that means to you as a dark sky officer?
Yeah, it's a dark sky park. So we worked with the national park here, Wildnaven National Park, to get dark sky status in 2016. That's when we got accredited. So we've been working, as you know, it takes quite a long time to get accreditation. So
yes, it does.
So it was very much a grassroots project. So I was at the time doing an undergrad dissertation on light pollution, and I was looking at actually the UK Galloway Forest Parks, which is the first in the UK. And the work that they had done, and looking at different concepts of dark skies, and I just suddenly really, if I can use that awful pun, a light bulb moment, because I live so close to the national park here, which is I suppose Ireland's nearest thing to wilderness. It's not real wilderness, but it's the nearest thing we have to it, and it just struck me that would be a really good site to have a dark sky park from. So that's how we got started. We set up a community group called the Friends of Mayo Dark Skies, and we've worked with different communities. So I'm based in a little town called Newport on the west coast of Ireland. So together with Newport Mullarani, which is just up the road, which actually you visited, Dani.
I did.
And Ballycroy, which is where the main visitor centre is for the national park. So those three communities work together and continue to do so, and are now, I guess, looking to engage more communities around County Mayo in a dark sky initiative.
That's one of the things that really struck me when I came over to Mayo. I was lucky enough to come over for the European Light Pollution Conference in 2019 that you hosted. So I got to go to a lot of those places you mentioned. I drove through Newport, and to see that it was a real community effort. That was so good to see that you had so many community people who really understood lighting and why the night skies were important. So you had it was just really good to see the community get behind that. Talking of Newport, I did see your work that you've just retrofitted, or you're going to retrofit the town of Newport. That's really exciting. So can you tell us a bit more about that and why you're doing it?
Yeah. I mean, even though we have a dark sky park area, there are still pockets of what you could call problem areas in lighting. So we want to protect the dark sky park for the longer term. It's not just a one-off tourism initiative, if you like. It's here for the long term, and that means working with those communities who, in fairness, are already engaged, but we have some elements of lighting that need adjustment. So in Newport, which is quite a small town, it's less than 1,000 people population, there's been some work done on the main road, which is a national route. So we've worked with Mayo County Council to look at the lighting was under a natural program for retrofit, but at that time when we started looking, they were retrofitting to the blue rich LEDs, which, as you know, have implications for all sorts of things. They're energy efficient, and that's why they were being installed, but they were not conducive to either dark skies or well-being and ecological reasons. So we managed to persuade our local authority to change all of those that they had put in originally and to retrofit the ones that needed upgrading. So we're using LEDs on the main roads, but we are using 2700 Kelvin LEDs on a national route. So it's the first in the country actually to have done that on a national route. Now we were lucky to get a little bit of funding, as I've said before, it is a community project primarily. So we have it's all been, up until recently, it's all been voluntary work and no funding. So we were able to get a small bit of funding from our Heritage Council, and that allowed us to engage some expertise. So at the European Symposium, which you mentioned, Dani, we met Roberto Corradini, the lighting designer, and we started talking to him about good light versus not so good light and what we could do. And I mean, he's amazingly creative. He had a look at Newport as a town and did some render drawings for us on the design of the lighting for the church and the viaduct bridge. So we have some heritage structures there, and on how they could be lit well without harming ecology and still be what the community want, because our church is obviously it's a community parish, so we wanted to make sure that the community was happy with that and have it lit appropriately, but not floodlit, which is what's there at the moment. So
yeah, I remember Roberto's talk. It was really good, and it's good to show people that dark skies doesn't mean no light.
Yeah.
So it's really important that the work you are doing there is work that gets seen and people can understand that we're not taking light away, we're just making light better for human health and for ecology, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, that's always been, we as we say, and I'm sure you guys say the same, it's not it's dark skies, not dark streets that we're after here. So we can still have certain levels of lighting. We just there's a natural penchant to use too much of it, in my opinion. So we can make adjustments. Given the location we're at here in the west of Ireland, it was kind of a cultural shift at the beginning, because we were one of the last places in the country to receive electrification. So
wow.
Which wasn't, it was I forget the year exactly now, but it was sort of fairly recently, sort of in the 70s. So that was in some places. So that's quite a mind shift to say to people, look, we are talking about a dark sky project, but we're not saying you need to switch everything off when it's not.
We're not going back to the 70s. Don't worry, you're gonna be okay.
Yeah, exactly. And as you well know, there is I suppose, a first reaction to dark skies, where people think that maybe it's going backwards economically, or it's a sign of, going backwards, for the community. Whereas I think, in fact, it's far more visionary, and it's far more in the way of progress, as it should be.
Yeah, definitely. And I think once we can get those messages across that it's actually better for people's health, people just do not realise the health implications, do they, of light pollution. So it's really important that we get those messages across. Thanks so much for your time today, Georgia. I've got one last question for you, which I think is the most important question. And that is, what is your favourite constellation and why?
Ooh. Okay, I think it has to be Orion.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
It's a good one. I know it's a classic, and probably a lot of people would say that. I love Orion because it sort of starts off the year, and I know there's that phrase about it being the theatre of the night for astronomers, that on the 1st of January, if you look due south, it's one of the most beautiful constellations to see. So it kind of starts off the year every year. And also because of the mythology behind it. What we've done here in Mayo, we have a story about a giant called Dohiborn, and I like to, when we're talking about stargazing and how constellations got their names, we like to use local mythology when we can. So we always talk about Orion being the Irish Dohiborn up in the sky. He's a giant.
That's amazing.
Our giant in the sky. So it resonates with people, just to get them into stargazing and storytelling.
Yeah, that's good. In Welsh we call him Mabon as well. So there's the Welsh stories that go with the stars as well. And I think that's a really big part of the work that we do, is keeping those cultural names alive, isn't it?
Yeah, we've got so many similarities there, Dani. We must talk about that another
time. We do. But thank you so much for your time, Georgia, and hopefully I get to see you at another symposium soon.
Yes, hope so. And you'll be welcome to come back to Mayo, and we'll hopefully pay a visit to you at some stage. But thank you very much for having me.
%60 of our biodiversity depends on a natural darkness to survive, and that's only the species we know about so far. One of the species that is heavily impacted by light pollution is our insects. So with us now is David Smith from Bug Life. Hi, David.
Hi, Dani. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. You work for Bug Life. Can you tell us a little bit more about the organisation and your role as a social change and advocacy officer?
Sure. So Bug Life, we are the Invertebrate Conservation Trust. Essentially, we're here to help save those small things that run the planet. So that's all of your bugs, your beetles, insects, spiders, and also things, other invertebrates like your crustaceans, crabs, lobsters, crayfish, even jellyfish. And there are over 40,000 species of invertebrates in the UK. So it's quite a substantial number of species. And basically what we want to do is promote the importance of invertebrates, help to protect them, whether that be through things like legislation or through practical conservation, restoring habitats and the like. And then also really help improve people's relationships with insects and invertebrates, and just get us to embrace them a little bit more.
That's really interesting. I totally didn't realise you do like marine invertebrates as well, especially jellies and things like that. That is something I totally didn't realise you did. Light pollution has a really negative effect on our insect world, doesn't it? Can you tell us a bit more about the impact that light pollution is having and what people can do to try and do their bit for our insects?
Sure. So if you can imagine, everything that we do as a population has an impact on the natural environment. And you think about our insects, they're the smallest little things down at the bottom. So everything's felt by them probably first and foremost. So the impacts of light pollution are becoming better understood as more and more research starts to happen. And insects, as you say, are one of these groups of species that are really impacted by them. So much so that up to a third of all insects that are attracted to streetlights can die as a consequence of that attraction. And that's through a number of different mechanisms. That might be through exhaustion, just simply flying around, not being able to leave the space of the street light. Or it might be through things like increased predation through bats and birds, and also other invertebrates, things like spiders that like to set up their webs around lights, because obviously that attraction of insects to them. And as to why insects are attracted to lights, we don't fully know. But if you can imagine the amount of information that an insect is processing for its very small little mind and for its very big eyes, they can become dazzling and almost impossible to get out of. It's just like information overload, for example. So that's why we think that they kind of get stuck in this cycle around the light. And also it becomes quite a significant beacon in and amongst the darkness, which is what they're naturally used to and evolved to adapt to, the darkness. So a big bright light is it's quite a big special thing and something that would attract them towards it. And in terms of numbers of these kind of things, one study in Germany has estimated that over 100 billion insects can die as a result of this, simply this attraction to street lights. But it's not just the attraction to lights that we're finding having a problem. We're starting to find more and more research, and it is an evolving and emerging area of research as to how light does impact invertebrates. And recently a study's just come out which has identified caterpillar populations being reduced by up to 52% in areas that are covered by LED streetlights, for example, which is obviously, that's half of all caterpillars, that's half of all the moth species are unable to survive and actually emerge as adults. And we're not sure why, but it's having impact on those caterpillars' ability to grow. Sometimes they're growing too quickly, sometimes they're not growing fast enough, sometimes they're not able to forage for food, for example, and sometimes they're just stuck in this constant daylight cycle rather than getting that rest that every living thing does need. So there's a whole load of different problems that are starting to be found around that, and it really is impacting insects across their way of life, through actually being able to navigate. A lot of insects and a lot of animal species use the stars and the moon to navigate at night, and obviously if you block those out because of street lights, for example, they can't do that and they get lost. But also just on their ability to move around. If they're unable to move between dark areas, then they can't move, they can't forage, they can't actually expand their ranges, and they're stuck in their small little spaces. And just simply because of their size, mobility is a tricky thing anyway. So yeah, if they're trapped in with permanent daylight, they're unable to move out of those areas, and they just become stuck, and eventually they just dwindle away and their populations completely decimate.
Gosh, it's so awful to think that we have these impacts with light, and light is so popular and it gets more and more popular all the time. People just use it so inconsiderately. We just don't think about the impact that it is having on even the smallest of creatures. It's really upsetting, and of course without our insects, that's the end of our way on life. There's no food, we cannot survive without our insects. So it's really important, isn't it, that people use light considerately. They use warmer temperature lights if they are going to have light out, and we make these dark spaces for our insects. What would you want to say to people who are listening to this podcast if they want to do the right thing for bugs? How can they make their garden or their local green area? What can they do to help the insects?
Well, the first thing is that actually we can make a quick and easy difference here. Light pollution is a rare form of pollution in one that we know the solution, we know what we can do, and actually once the light is turned off, that pollution has gone, it ceases to exist. So first and foremost is to question whether you actually need that light, whether you need that light on for all the time or whether you can just use it, when you need it. It's crucial that we reduce the amount of light that we actually have shining on these places. As you say, reducing the brightness and the intensity of those lights is really going to help. And it's really crucial to make sure that if we are restoring habitats and we are having more wild gardens, that actually we consider where our lights are shining. And if we have a wildflower patch in our garden, make sure that your spotlight for your back door isn't shining over that wild patch, so that the nocturnal insects can go about their business, and actually the daytime insects can also get their sleep as well. So it's all well and good restoring our gardens and our wild spaces to be good for insects, but making sure that we make sure that area isn't polluted from light is crucial. And I think really something that I'd really encourage everyone to do is actually just embrace insects and embrace what they have to offer. It's amazing. We have this whole complete amazing world just literally on our doorsteps, wherever you are. It doesn't matter how big a space you have. Quite often you'll find insects in your inside spaces, but if you've got a garden, brilliant. You can go on safaris and you can see a whole range of invertebrates, which are really fascinating and are not things to be scared of. Go out, embrace them, enjoy them, observe them, and actually recognize that if you are making a difference, these little things feel it first and foremost. And actually, if we can make a little difference to them, then we can make a little difference to the world, and it will all cumulatively add together.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the study with caterpillars, I think I read that a blue tip brood needs 15,000 caterpillars to survive to get that brood through, and light pollution was having a massive knock-on effect because of, like you said, it was taking out half the caterpillars. There wasn't enough food around for the blue tip chicks, so that was having a massive consequence. And I think people need to start making those connections, that we are all intertwined. There is no us and them. We are all part of this big ecosystem, and once we take away one, and the insect, it's not like it's one little chunk. They are the bottom of the pyramid, aren't they? Without them, everything collapses. I came across the amendment to the environmental bill that's going through the House of Lords. Oh, it has just been debated in the House of Lords. Is there anything people can do? Can they write to their MP to get them to support this bill? Is there anything that we can do to support that work? Because it's so important.
Sure. So one of the things that we're trying to do is really raise the issue of light pollution up the agenda with our elected officials to actually get a national target in place to reduce light pollution, because we feel that without a target, how are we going to know that the changes that we're making is beneficial? And we see this recently with some of the studies coming around the LEDs, which actually are showing an increase in light pollution. Whilst they're being seen as a good thing for reducing energy, actually they're contributing to light pollution. So we need to start measuring these things, and this is what we're trying to do with this amendment to the Environment Bill, which is a landmark piece of legislation to make our environment a better place. And light pollution was omitted from this bill. Other forms of pollution were included within it: air pollution, water quality, even the single-use plastics, for example, all included in this. And we were trying to get light pollution put in there and have something in legislation which commits our governments to reducing the levels of light pollution. Now, this was debated in the House of Lords. It received a lot of favourable mentions, but fundamentally it didn't proceed. But what it did do is it did raise the awareness, I think, of light pollution as an issue. And we're hopeful that in the next stages, we might be able to get some commitments to look at how we can bring this into a law, as has been done in other nations around the world. So there's already a precedent there, really, that we can follow as a country. And as people, as constituents, as people who can elect officials, we can write to them. We can challenge them to say, what are you doing? What is the government doing about light pollution? Even our local councils, we can say, what are we doing to take light pollution seriously, to reduce it, and to make sure that we consider its impacts on the world. Not just to insects and invertebrates, but also to people as well. And how can we find the correct balance to restore our night skies? And it really does require everyone to kind of buy into this and make sure that we raise it up the agenda, make sure we're all doing our own little bit to help help this thing and actually make a difference, rather than letting this go, letting it slide before it becomes too late and becomes a harder problem to tackle in the future.
That's great. So everybody, write to your MPs and AMs. There is a cross-party group on dark skies in Westminster, so maybe your MP is already on this and you can ask them to actually act on this stuff. Going back to the crossover to LEDs, I learned a really good quote earlier this year, which was "Don't cross the road for climate change, only to be hit by the bus of biodiversity collapse." And I think that really sums up the move to LEDs without really understanding the different things about wavelength and temperature of the light. But like you said, we know how to fix this problem. We just need to act on it. And that is one of my favourite things about working as a dark sky officer, is that usually as conservationists we can be a bit doom and gloom, like the plastic issue. No one knows how to solve that issue. But when it comes to light pollution, once the lights have gone and once the lights have been corrected or have been re-angled, that light pollution is gone. It's been fixed. There is no cleanup. So it's something so simple, and it doesn't have to be things. It doesn't have to be just limited to people in rural areas either. I think it's so important that urban people get this message, because it's so much more prevalent to them because they're being exposed to so much more light pollution. But thanks so much for it's been really interesting to speak to you today, David. I have one last question for you. I've gotten really into moths. As my work as a dark sky officer, I didn't realise how many moths there are, and I've become a little bit obsessed. So what is your favourite type of moth?
Oh, what a great question. I wasn't expecting that. I've got a beetle for you, but let's moths. Well, I really like the hawk moths. An elephant hawk moth is what a spectacular beast that is. And if you ever get the opportunity to see one and to appreciate one and just to look at the colours, I think a lot of people think about moths as being kind of brown or quite drab, but actually there are a lot of moths out there that have got lots of bright colours on them, pinks and greens and purples and all sorts. And yeah, I think an elephant hawk moth is up there for me. And perhaps more impressive than the moth itself is the caterpillar stage of one. If you can find one of them.
I found my first one a few weeks ago, and they are massive. They are huge. I understood the elephant element, I think, once I saw the caterpillar.
Exactly, yeah. But yeah, it's moths are there. They're not going to hurt you. They go around and they get around and do their business. They're vital for pollinating a whole range of flowers that don't get pollinated by our daytime insects. And just let them get around and get on with their business, and embrace them when you can see them. And actually, if you don't have the lights on, they're going to just carry on and play the role that they're supposed to play and not harm you. So yeah, just embrace them. I think it's the best thing you can do.
I agree. They're like our little goth butterflies, aren't they?
Yeah.
I've got a lot of respect for moths now. But thanks so much, David, for your time, and it's been great speaking to you.
That's great. Thanks, Dani.
Eryri was designated as a dark sky reserve in 2015 after lots of hard work by the International Dark Sky Association. Here with us today is Ruskin Hartley, the IDA's Executive Director, to tell us more. Hello, Ruskin. Thank you for joining us.
Shwmae, Dani.
Oh, da iawn, da iawn. And you're joining us all the way from Arizona. So how is it in Arizona today?
It's going to be warm today, but the clouds have come over, so we're getting a respite from the heat.
Oh, of course, we're talking about dark sky, so it's gone cloudy. It's typical, isn't it?
Yeah, no stars tonight.
So you're the Executive Director of the International Dark Sky Association. Can you tell us a bit more about the IDA, how they came to be, and what you're trying to achieve as an organisation?
Yeah, the IDA is an organization based here in Tucson, Arizona, but really has a global reach. We have people supporting and grassroots advocates on every continent apart from Antarctica at the moment, and they're all united by a common desire to really protect the night from light pollution, to raise awareness of the impact that artificial light at night has on wildlife, on human well-being, and of course our view of the stars, and giving advocates simple tools that they can be part of the solution.
It's a great organisation, and your website is fantastic. It's got so many really easy to use resources and things on there. And like you said, the global reach of the International Dark Sky Association is huge. And I feel like I'm always reading about a new dark sky place that's come on board. But how did you get into your journey to start this fight against light pollution?
Yeah, I was born and raised in the UK actually, where I was a geographer because I really couldn't make up my mind what I wanted to do in a sense as I grew up, and um, I ended up in the US, and kind of fell into a role in the broader kind of conservation community. Actually, I got my start as a person who made maps of all things.
Oh,
And actually got my start in forest conservation. I worked for a little bit, actually for not a little bit, for 16 years, working on redwood forest conservation in Northern California. I spent a little bit of time working on water quality issues in the beaches of Southern California, Santa Monica Bay, those iconic
oh, wow.
beaches. And so this really a strong thread to kind of help empower people to protect things that they care about. Those two issues, everyone has probably heard of the iconic coast redwoods, and people have seen the beautiful beaches in Southern California. But if you want to protect the iconic redwoods, yes, there are some things you can do, but they're out there. They're only, in a sense, found in Northern California. What drew me to the International Dark Sky Association was the ability to work on an issue that most people had not thought about, which is the issue of light pollution, but an issue that impacts everyone, irrespective of where you live, and something that there are actually some relatively simple things that every single individual can do to help be part of the solution. So it was really that combination that drew me to this field. We have a lot of people in this field. We have astronomers, we have ecologists, we have landscape architects, and it really brings people together from a wide set of disciplines, and the ability to learn from all of those people and support them and connect them has just been very inspiring over the last 2.5, 3 years that I've been involved.
So you've been all over the place, but like you said, the common theme between us all really is the night sky. And it should be accessible to all. It should be something, a resource that people should be able to access from anywhere for free, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
So when we look at the International Dark Sky Association, we've got reserves, we've got parks, we've got the newer ones coming through, like the urban dark sky places. Why is it so important for us to put these legal protections in place for our dark skies?
I think the background to that, Dan, is you mentioned we were all connected with the sky overhead. We're really under one sky, and we really look to the sky overhead and our ability to access the wonders of the universe. The dark sky really is one of the last global commons, and it's really been under threat essentially for the last 100 years, since the first light bulb was invented and someone turned it on and lit up, maybe dimly lit up initially, their yard outside. And what we have seen over the last 100 years, as technology has evolved and our ability to light the natural world at night has accelerated, as light has just become cheaper and more ubiquitous, we have started to lose and increasingly accelerating the loss of the ability to connect with the universe around us. And a recent paper actually came out last week, indicated in the last 25 years, basically in one generation, light pollution around the world had increased by essentially 50%. As a bottom threshold, with some indication based upon some of the analysis that they did, that the increase in light pollution might have been as much as 270%. Essentially, we have gone from a period, maybe a generation or two ago, where most people could step outside their doors and see the Milky Way, to a point that 99% of people in North America and Europe live under a light polluted sky, and so that has become the norm. Our International Dark Sky Places program was founded 20 years ago, and with really two objectives: to both recognize and give people tools to protect naturally dark skies, and raise awareness around those issues, but also to demonstrate that you can use light responsibly to be part of the solution. This is not a choice between, do we have lights or do we not have lights? This is, we like to say, is a choice. You can have a dark sky and still have some light on the ground, so you can get around at night. And really, these places, and now there are more than 180 of them around the world, are really place-based demonstrations of this concept that of protecting intrinsically dark skies, promoting the responsible use of light, and I'd say probably critically also providing people opportunities to enjoy the natural world outside. Too many of us these days are slumped in front of the television or in front of our phone at night and are just entirely disconnected with what's going on with the natural world. Leave aside the natural world at night.
definitely. And obviously, I'm sat in a rural area, and Eryri is a very rural place. But I'm very keen to explain to people that it's not just a rural issue. It's not just a tourism fad to bring people into the rural areas, but those who are most at risk from the damaging health complications that come from light pollution are those of us who live in the urban areas.
Yeah.
And they're the places that we can see the most impact the most quickly if we can just get that message through to urban areas. So what would your advice be to people who live in our most light polluted places? What steps can they take?
Well, I think it really starts with raising awareness of any issue, and that awareness might be sparked by maybe they read an article in a local paper, or maybe they do have the opportunity to go out to Snowdonia and stumble outside the pub after a hard day walking in the mountains and look up and realize, my goodness, what is that over my head? And maybe that's the first time they've had the ability to look up and see a truly dark sky and realize that there are thousands of stars, and there's this thing called the Milky Way, of which that is where our planet, our solar system, really that's home. So often it starts with that spark of awareness, and on the other hand is helping people understand that light pollution really is a pollutant. Light pollution is a pollutant, just like air can be polluted by, that carbon monoxide or particulates or greenhouse gas emissions, or water can be polluted in so many ways. And light pollution impacts basically every facet of life on Earth. Billions of migrating birds every year are drawn into cities by the large light dome that can be seen hundreds of miles, and many of them, tragically, crash into buildings drawn by the light and then die. We're learning more and more about the impact of artificial light at night on insects, and that's important for anyone who cares about where their food comes from. Those are our pollinators. If our pollinators are crashing, our food supply is in a bad place. And as you mentioned, more and more we're learning about the impact of excessive light at night on human well-being. And more and more studies are demonstrating from a public health perspective, areas that have high levels of light pollution, they also tend to have high levels of noise pollution, other sorts of pollution, but they are correlated with many of the modern ills and diseases of modern society, be that diabetes, be that hypertension, or be that, tragically in many cases, cancer. So it starts with that awareness, and then it moves into giving people things that they can do to be part of the solution. And often that is, there are things they can do at home. They can draw the blinds at night. They can turn off their porch light when they're not using it. And they can start advocating to their city council or their town council and their national governments that there is an issue that they should take seriously.
That's really good advice, and that's an issue that we are seeing creep up now, is the amount of glazing in houses, and they don't have blinds, but I don't think people realise that you can see them from miles around, and you're basically just advertising everything that's in your home. So people are either very, very into exhibitionism, or they just do not realise how visible they are. But that's really good advice. And one of the things that we do work on is light retrofitting in the national park and making sure all fixtures are fully shielded, facing downwards. And really crucially, one of the messages that I think is getting more and more important is getting that temperature of the light correct, because I see a lot of lights that are downward facing. They are fully cut off, but sadly they're a really high temperature when it comes to the light, so they've got a lot of that blue wave content, which leads to all those complications that we've just spoken about. One thing we've got to mention is the Under One Sky conference that is coming up. So would you like to tell us more about the conference?
Yeah, so one of the things IDA has done for the last couple of years since we've all moved into a virtual world is we have started pulling together our global advocacy community in a fall autumn conference.
Yeah, I kept trying to get a trip to Arizona from work, but I don't think that would happen.
No.
And now you've put it on.
No one travels anywhere. So last year we met over a 24-hour period, a kind of rolling 24-hour period through the night, where we heard from a dozen advocates from as many countries in terms of what's going on with the state of light pollution, and attempts to raise awareness from the Himalayas to Nigeria and Africa to Guatemala. So we heard from all these incredible advocates around the world what they were doing in their community, and we're excited to put that conference on again this year, the week of November 12th and 13th, I think it is 13th, 14th, will confirm that. So it's free. You can sign up on our website, darksky.org. There'll be a link there. It's free for everyone. We want as many people to participate as possible. It's an opportunity to hear from your peers around the world, and also to hear from some experts who are coming up with solutions and things that you can try in your communities. We want people to feel informed and empowered, and feel ready to talk to their family and talk to their neighbours and their elected politicians about the steps that they can take.
I attended as much as I could last year, and it was so good, and like the variety of speakers and hearing as well from the different communities around the world and so many different Indigenous people, and really getting that understanding of the cultural heritage and the cultural links that people still hold so close to them, about the stars, which is something so important that people just don't think about. So Ruskin, one of the quite controversial issues that's coming up in dark skies is the creation of mega constellations. And these webs of satellites that are being sent up by Elon Musk, OneWeb, Starlink, all these companies who want to get their hands on space. What are your feelings and thoughts on these satellites?
It's a complex issue, but I think it's a really critical issue for the dark sky movement as a whole to grapple with. Essentially, these are companies who are aiming to bring broadband internet to parts of the world that are beyond the reach of fiber, beyond the reach of cables, and clearly that's a laudable goal. And many of us, we rely on satellites every day. This conversation wouldn't be possible if it weren't for satellites. So they play a really critical role in helping support society. But more and more we're learning as these new satellite swarms. We love constellations; they're beautiful. We're starting to refer to these as satellite swarms. These satellite swarms, which are these installations of thousands and up to tens of thousands of satellites in low Earth orbit. These tend to be closer to the Earth so that they can provide broadband internet access with low latency. What we're learning is that the individual satellites tend to be visible, particularly during dawn and dusk, and particularly as they're going up as they're rising. And many people have looked up into the sky and wondering, what are those train of 50 stars streaking across the sky? And it turns out what they are is, at the moment, they're the Starlink constellations that are going up. Recent research that came out earlier this year indicates that we have to be concerned not just about the impact of the visibility of these individual streaks, which are of great concern if you're an astronomer or if you're an astrophotographer or someone who just wants to appreciate your natural sky unimpaired by these fast-moving satellites. What we're learning is that they are actually, because they're reflecting the sunlight, they're actually increasing natural sky brightness background much in the same way that ground-based light pollution is. Some early modeling work suggests even the levels of satellites that are going up at the moment has increased natural brightness of dark sky places by about 10%. 10% incidentally is the threshold that the International Astronomy Union considers from a pristine versus a polluted sky, which is suitable for some of the most exquisite telescopes. The projections are if 50,000, which is the current plan, get launched and there's no further mitigations, natural sky brightness might increase by 250%. That essentially translates into a dark sky site. If you're at a dark sky site beyond the reach of all light pollution, maybe you look up and you can see 3, 4, 5,000 stars. 50% of those will be lost if this comes to pass. Now, I also want to say the satellite industry is also, certainly Starlink has taken steps to try and reduce the brightness of the individual satellites, which is positive, and we're optimistic there. But this bigger issue about what is the cumulative impact of all of these satellites in the sky is really the issue that I think needs to, the dark sky movement as a whole needs to pay attention to. And it really speaks to who owns the sky. And we come back to this concept of the sky as a global commons, and it really will take all of us to work together to ensure it's protected long into the future.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts on that. I understand it is a complex issue, but that's the issue that I have with it, is that this is one person's goal essentially, and they've had this massive impact on the night sky without, speaking to any of the citizens on Earth. Just this one person from this one nation could go and litter the night sky essentially. It's really quite mind-blowing that someone has that autonomy and power and
Well,
no
it's
consideration.
and essentially there's a new frontier, and space, while
Yeah.
there are some regulations in place in terms of launch and orbital allocation, there's no protections in place with respect to sort of the impact of space-based light pollution. And while Elon Musk and SpaceX were the first to market, they're not the only to market. There's OneWeb in the UK that's part owned by the British government. There's Amazon Kuiper. There's constellations coming out of China and India. So this is not an issue of just one individual. They certainly were the first to market, and they have, at least they have worked with the broader astronomy community to try and mitigate the impact. So really our concern goes beyond the one individual to what is the totality of the impact as we essentially move to an area where we're commercializing space, moving from private, government-led unusual expeditions to, in a sense, access to space being a daily occurrence.
So I have one last question for you, and it's probably the most important question. So I hope you're ready. What is your favourite dark sky reserve, and why is it Eryri?
Oh, you can't ask me that, Dani. As they'd say in the US, I'll take the Fifth Amendment on that one. No, I think what sets our program apart is I'm not just saying this. Every place is different. Every dark sky reserve, yes, they have a common element, which is hopefully there's places there that you can go out at night and look overhead. But the experience of being in Snowdonia National Park at night is going to be incredible. Those wonderful wild mountain valleys, or maybe you've made it to the top of Snowdon and you're there to watch the sunset and maybe the full moon rise. That would be pretty special. But if you're down in New Zealand, down in Arakai Mackenzie, or out on Great Barrier Island, the experience again is it's very special. It's unique, and it's seeing these landscapes at night. So many of us visit these places, and we visit them and experience them during the day. And what our friends in the National Park Service here in the US like to say is, half the park is after dark.
I love that saying.
And I think that's a real good reminder that yes, it's great to look at that vista of that valley in during the early morning or as the sun is setting, but as the night goes down, a whole different environment comes to life, and really that's one of the things that set these places apart. Dark sky parks allow people to experience those parks at night, and too often our parks tend to be closed at night. A little bit different probably in the UK example, given the nature of parks. You can't really close them, but many of the parks around the world, they do kind of shut their gates at night. Well, people feel like they can't go there, and really the opportunity to participate in a night walk or a star program in one of these places is really special. And you mentioned the culture and traditional knowledge. Often you'll go and hear, what did the people who originally come from that area, how did they relate to the sky overhead? And so many people around the world, the first stories were told by interpreting the stars overhead. And really beyond the impact on wildlife and beyond the human impact on human health, it's really that connection that we're losing. We're losing that connection both to our past and our present and our place in the universe. That's why places like Snowdonia are so important.
Well, thank you so much, Ruskin. I think that's a lovely place to leave it. I agree wholeheartedly with the half the park is after dark, and that connection to our past and our future in the night sky is something that we really need to protect. So I really appreciate you coming and speaking to us all today, and thank you so much for your time. So, have we convinced you that our night skies are worth saving? We hope we've inspired you to look up and to tackle light pollution by using light with consideration. This podcast was created as Eryri is celebrating 70 years since we were designated as a National Park Authority. Keep an eye out for special episodes next month as we celebrate this anniversary by checking our social media channels.